We will now consider House Resolution 4686. Clerk will read.
Whereas Representative Richard DeBolt was born on November 3, 1965 in Tacoma, Washington, and whereas Representative Richard DeBolt traveled extensively as a youth while his father served in the military, and whereas Representative Richard DeBolt graduated from Cheyenne East High School in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and whereas Representative Richard DeBolt graduated from University of Wyoming, where he studied international relations. And whereas Representative Richard DeBolt married his wife Amy in 1989, and whereas Representative Richard DeBolt and his wife Amy have 2 children, Sophie DeBolt, Truelson and Austin DeBolt. And whereas Representative Richard DeBolt has been a leader in the business community, including as former director of the Chehalis Centralia Chamber of Commerce, and whereas Representative Richard DeBolt was elected to the Washington State House of Representatives in 1996, and whereas Representative Richard DeBolt has been a pillar in his communities for years, having served in several leadership roles, including on the board of directors for the United Way of Lewis County. And whereas Representative Richard DeBolt has received numerous awards and recognition from various groups for his work in the Washington State Legislature and his communities. And whereas Richard DeBolt has advocated for taxpayers, employers, schools, local governments, and more accountability in state government during his time in the Washington State Legislature.
Last line.
Representative to the Honorable Richard DeBolt.
Representative Wilcox to move the resolution.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move Resolution 4686.
House Resolution 4686 has been moved and seconded. Remarks. Representative Wilcox.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess in honor of Richard, I should button up my jacket. He's always been very careful about that. Madam Speaker, this is the end of an era. It's not just about Representative DeBolt. There's others that are leaving. But Richard is the person that I've sat next to in this chamber for 8 years. There's been some strange moments sitting next to Richard. We've become close friends. We've gotten some very strange messages texted to us. For example, frequently, "You're in the shot, JT," or "You're in the shot, Richard. Stop laughing. Behave yourself. You're slumping. Put your computer down." One of the really nice things about Richard is the first thing I ever heard from him, I think, when I first ran for office about 11 years ago, was you should be able to say everything that you need to say in 3 minutes. I thought that the majority would appreciate that. We don't always live by it, but Richard believed it. We've had some really fun hijinks down here in this part of the chamber. One of our deals has been for many years that if either Richard or I stand up to speak, the other person, because they're in the TV shot, is supposed to adopt a posture and an attitude as if we were learning at the feet of Socrates. And it's really, really hard to give a speech when the person next to you is doing that. But Richard has always been equal to that. One of my fairly early experiences with Richard happened when I was a freshman, and I mentioned before I was on Ways and Means. Inadvertently, someone in our caucus, who's no longer here, had subverted the rules and convinced all of us, except for Representative Gary Alexander, who was our lead, to support his bill. And then broke the news to Gary Alexander. And Richard has always been really good at supporting his ranking members. And so he took all of us in one by one and let us know just how bad we had been. And I think Gary asked Richard not to do that to me because I was so new. I had no clue that you can't trust every person in this building. But Richard let me have it. He lowered the boom. And in case you haven't noticed, Richard is capable of being very intimidating. And when I was done, I looked at Richard and said, "Well, Richard, I've had to do what you're doing quite a few times in my life, and I just want you to know that I know from experience you are really good at that." And I've told people over and over that I've only had half a bad day in my 10 years in the legislature. And when Richard lowered the boom on me, that was in the afternoon, so I had a good morning and a really bad half day. And the reason that it was a bad day was because nobody wants to disappoint Richard. There's no one as loyal as Richard. There's also no better delegator. I've never met someone that could delegate better than Richard. What a great talent to have. And you lift everyone up around you, Richard. I want you to know that because I bet you're going to do that in your future life. Now, not everything that Richard does is perfect. In fact, more than anyone I've ever known, I think Richard walks around the world with two little figures perched on his shoulders. One's an angel, the other one's a demon. I would say that most of the time, maybe 90% of the time, the angel wins. But the demon wins 10% of the time until you get to the last week or two of the session. And then the demon, I think, wins about 50% of the time, Rich. And I've always thought the scariest sight in this building is Richard walking around like he's got nothing to do, because he's going to find it. Best example of that, I think, was the first year that he and I sat here when he wasn't leader, and he didn't have enough to do. And he was looking for things to speak about. And if you haven't noticed, he's not always paying perfect attention. And he heard some things that bothered him. So he jumps up and gives a really rabble-rousing speech about how bad this bill is, while I am pulling on his sleeve telling him, it's Gina's bill. It's Gina's bill. They took it down. Took us 2 years to get that bill back. Well, then to make matters worse, about a month later, I'm in the back of the chamber here, and he starts doing the same thing. And I'm sprinting up the aisle, hampered to some extent, because he's doing it to my bill this time, and I can't stop laughing. So that was a fun year for Rich. He doesn't always kill two bills, but it's easier when they're Republican bills. I think the same year he was a little less intense than he sometimes is, and he was playing some games on his laptop or something like that, and his phone goes off. And you know that Richard's used to being in trouble, because instead of scrambling to turn off his phone, he just points at me. And I got gavelled. Rich, I'm making light of all of this. And I think you've learned in the last week or two that there's nobody that has made a bigger difference from the minority over 10 years than you have. And I know the people on the other side feel exactly the same way, and you're going to have to hear that at length today. I hope you are crying like a baby when this is done, because you need to know you don't often hear that you're loved when you're leader. But you're going to hear it now. I'm so glad that Amy's here, because she's put up with a lot over 24 years. And you're like a brother to many people. You've made a difference here. You've never let being in the minority get in your way. You've never given up. I wish you would sometimes, but you really do never give up. And the thing that is just driving me crazy today, Rich, is I should have expected this, but the day that you decide is your last day in the legislature is one of the most drama-filled days I've ever had here. And thank you, Richard. You had to do that to us, didn't you? Thanks, Rich.
Further remarks? And before I call on Representative Theringer, I do for the body just want to recognize that Representative DeBolt's wife, Amy, has joined us at the rostrum. The good member... The good member from the 24th District, Representative Theringer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When I joined this House 10 years ago with Minority Leader Wilcox and you, Madam Speaker, Rich DeBolt was the minority leader. And I was a freshman, and I quickly thought he was one of the most obnoxious people I have ever met. I thought, what is this? This guy just keeps popping up, keeps causing trouble. I'm going, where does a guy like that come from? And through the years, as I've been able to work with Rich, and I think some of us, and in fact, Representative Smith and myself sort of agreed to this, and when we did a little capital budget event for Richard, we noticed a drastic change in Richard when he went from minority leader to a policy person. And certainly working with him on the capital budget has been one of the highlights for me being in this session. And as JT mentioned, he lifts people up. He lifted me up, and he lifted up our whole process because he has a big mind, and a big heart. And he cares about the citizens of Washington State. He cares about this institution, and his skills and that big heart and that big mind will be missed. I certainly will miss him. But Rich, forever together. Thank you.
Further remarks, the good member from the 9th District, Representative Schmick.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Representative DeBolt was the mentor of a former colleague of mine, and that was Don Cox, who served the 9th District, and he was here. And so I asked Don, I said, what about Rich? And Don said, well, he said, I would always ask him questions because you were his mentor. And he says, while he was playing his Game Boy, and I do remember the Game Boys, he could answer the question. He said he knew all the answers, but it was always on that Game Boy. And I guess I have another question for you, Rich, and is it really true that you felt that some people were talking too much on the floor, so that you went and came in early one day and loosened the microphones underneath the desks so that when those people got up to speak, all of a sudden their mic wasn't working? I've just heard that was, but that was from Don Cox. He's a fine man, and I still get a visit with him today. I will remember one thing always from my tutelage under you, and that is want nothing and shoot the hostage. I will remember these always. I will say, just to let the House know, when Representative DeBolt asked me to be the healthcare lead, I told him no 3 times before he talked me into it, and I did it, and I still resent you for that. But I have come to enjoy that committee and working with the good lady from the 34th. But I just want to tell you, I will miss you. Thank you for all your years of service.
Further remarks, the good member from the 3rd District, Representative Riccelli. There's a big sigh up here when you rose, just so you know.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm so pleased to stand today as we recognize Richard. And Richard and I didn't get off to the greatest start, and it's something that we've talked a lot about in our years here. When I came in, I sat where Representative Klobuchar sat, and sometimes the Republicans even passed me amendments, forgot I was on that side. And I got up one day as a freshman, and the minorities leader's job, part of it is to kind of size up the freshmen on the other side, see they're coming in. I got up and I gave my first speech, and I thought it was a stem winder, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. And Richard stands up and said, "We should have gavelled you down." And I was taken back. What's going on here? Who is this guy? And then I said something like, "Well, do what you got to do." And quickly, I think he went to the other side and said, "Berquist tried to fight me." And that actually, that first year was kind of rough. It was fun. The former gentleman from the 4th, Larry Haler, said, "Great speech, kid." but we, that first year we didn't chat much, and then soon that next year we got together down in the lunchroom, and he said, "Hey, when I came and stepped up to you and did that, like, hey, let's put that aside," and we started chatting, and I've learned a lot from you. Like, for instance, right now, it's a stream of consciousness. I wanted to have some notes in front of me, but the second year you told me, speak from the heart. You told me, you don't have to tell that to some second year Democrat. You said, speak from the heart. And I'm speaking from the heart today. And I think I realize why that's so important. Because in your job as minority leader, and then your job around here, you knew it was about relationships, and you knew that what we were saying did matter. And sometimes it didn't always feel like we were listened to. And if you notice, in my time here, I try my best, and during those speeches, sometimes they're long, we make eye contact, because you know how important it is that people listen, that we're all bringing a voice here. And you listened to me. I came to you, and you did a fantastic job as capital budget chair, working with Rep. Theringer and so many people. But I came to you once on some kitchen equipment that we talked about. But more importantly, a couple years, I came back on some dental access stuff. And you pushed back, and rightfully so. But you listened. And we worked together. And because of you, thousands of more people are getting access to dental. And you listened. You know, a few years back, too, you grabbed me. I don't know, it was close to signing die. And you said, hey, come up. I got something for you. And you had this thing that hung on your wall, and it was an elephant crushing a donkey. But we sat in my office, and you said, I want you to have this. And you said, because you remembered that day, and you said, a lot of people looked at that as that elephant crushing the donkey. It was kind of a chest-puffing thing, but you said, the donkey was standing up that day, and you said, that reminded me of you. And that was so impactful and so meaningful. And you get this place. And I'll just close by saying, you know, my parents were here the other day, and you said something to them. You said your mom loved this place. And what I know that you believe, and we didn't hang out much outside of this place, but we love this place and this institution, and that shows through. You care about this institution. You care about what goes on here. And I hope to help carry that tradition on, because I think it's a heck of a tradition and something we should be all honored to carry on. Thank you.
Further remarks, the good member from the 20th District, Representative Orcutt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A lot of the House is a little too new to know this, that when I came into the legislature, Richard and I were not in the same district. I was actually in the 18th District at the time, so we were in adjacent districts. And I think Richard was a floor leader at the time, but he was also my mentor. And Richard, despite all of the duties that he had in his leadership position, still took time to mentor me. Unfortunately, it was sometimes after I'd done the thing wrong that he mentored me. And sometimes it was kind of like, you screwed up. And, you know, over time, I've seen Richard kind of go from being a little more blunt to being a little more of a guide. Of somebody who guides you. And instead of coming up and confronting you face to face and trying to get you to turn 180 degrees, he comes up beside you and kind of talks you through. And you don't realize that while he's talking you through something, he's getting you to turn and go in the right direction and to do things in the right manner. So he was my mentor when we first got here. And a couple of years later, he became the caucus leader. And I got a chance to watch Richard lead. I got a chance to see his belief in the institution. I got a chance to see his belief in our caucus. I got a chance to see how much he cared for the people in our caucus, how much he cared for the people of the state of Washington. Because everything he was doing, everything he was leading us to do, was about making this state better for the citizens of the state of Washington. And I really appreciated that about him. And I started to understand how much he really cared about people. And you know, along the way, he started to have some health problems and had to step down from that leadership position. And that was hard for me. I know it was hard for him. I think he did it because he thought it was the best thing, not only for him, but for the caucus and for the institution. And then somewhere along the way, I ended up being redistricted into the 20th. So I became his seatmate. So through the years, he's been my mentor. He's been my leader. He's been my seatmate. But all that time, he's also been my friend. And I very much appreciate my friend. He cares very much about our caucus. He cares very much about the citizens, especially of our district, about the people statewide. He cares about this institution. And I so much appreciate all of the lessons that he has helped all of us to learn. And like the gentleman from the 3rd, you know, he's left a legacy. He's left a legacy of leadership and stewardship of what we're granted here as legislators that we need to carry on. Richard, I want to say thank you for being my mentor. Thank you for being my leader. Thank you for being my seatmate. But mostly, thank you for being my friend.
Further remarks, the good member from the 34th District, Representative Fitzgibbon.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. You're hearing a little bit of a theme on our side, and it'll probably continue, which is that we all like Richard a lot more than we used to. And, he has this tendency to kind of grow on you like a fungus. And when I started here at the same time as Representative Theringer and you, Madam Speaker, 10 years ago, I came into this body as a young, environmentally minded, sort of hot under the collar freshman, ready to go into battle. And that was kind of a recipe for a little bit of friction with the minority leader at the time. And as we've heard before, he can be kind of intimidating at times. And there were a lot of times that first year or two in office when, he would kind of storm over and tell me something that I had done that really made their side mad, or that I should really knock off doing, and some of the time he was right, and a lot of the time I was right. But the thing about that time, which was certainly tough, and there's a lot of tension and friction around that, he was never unkind about it. He was never, a mean guy. He just was direct. And he picked his battles pretty well, in my experience. He picked to fight about the things that were really important to his district and to his caucus and to him personally. And I valued that because there's a lot of conflict in this place. You and I, Madam Speaker, have talked about productive conflict and how do we exercise productive conflict in this environment, because we're never, I don't agree with anybody on this floor 100% of the time, and some more than others. But I really think that Richard exhibits that and shows us how to disagree with each other in a way where even at the end of the disagreement, we're still disagreeing, but we got somewhere. Maybe we understood each other a little bit better, and we found a better policy, even if it's one that he didn't end up voting for. Or that I didn't end up voting for. Then as time went on, I sit here next to the capital budget chair, and I also sat next to the previous capital budget chair. And when Richard moved into that role and would come over and work with the gentleman to my right or his predecessor, Representative Dunshee, I started to really see that other side of him that we've heard others mention when he developed that focus on policy, and I think he really went into the capital budget because he knew that was a place that his skills as a negotiator, but also just the high impact that the capital budget has on so many of our communities, that was a great place for him to land after moving out of the role of minority leader. And I really started to see this new side of him, this really policy focused and budget focused side, and very results oriented. And it was really great to watch that relationship, and I know the capital budget's always been one of our more bipartisan endeavors here, but it was really fun to watch that side of him unfold, and I think we got a lot of good things done in every part of the state in the capital budgets that he worked on in that time. It really wasn't until this year, though, that I got to know Richard at the level that I do now. When he stepped into the role as ranking member on the Environment Committee, I realized just how smart he is, how transparent he is when he wants to be. And I've learned a ton from him. And the way that he treats people, the way that he observes people, he's paying attention even when it seems like he's not paying attention. And he's paying attention, of course, I talked about policy already, but he's paying attention to people and what makes them tick. And once, we got to that point, we actually talked about what made each other tick. And I don't think I've had that conversation with just about anybody here on either side of the aisle. And I guess just to wrap up, you've heard this from a lot of people today, but I'll add myself to that list. You've made me a better legislator. And you've made probably just about everybody that you've interacted with a better legislator. And so thank you.
Further remarks, the good member from the 10th District, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's been a lot of incredible things said. I had an amazing story that I wanted to tell just briefly. When Richard began to do more in policy, and he was my assistant ranking in the ITED committee, and I was his assistant ranking in Capitol. We spent a lot of time together. And I'm sure that that at times was wearying for Richard. And we were walking in together into our minority leader's office. And he was so frustrated with me, I'm sure, from just the many words I had to say about something. And in that moment, he declared to our minority leader, I probably shouldn't tell the rest of that story, so I'm going to skip that one. Here's what I want to say to Richard DeBolt. Other than your faith walk with our Lord, your best decision is sitting next to you. Watching you and Amy, and having both of you love me and love so many of us here, and reach out and share life with us and invite us into your lives. Thank you. Richard, I just want to say that watching you in these years, first as my leader and then as this incredible gift to Washington State, as someone with enormous intellectual horsepower, governed by a heart for those we serve, has been nothing but a privilege. You have taught me so much about leadership, about servant leadership, about sharing your heart. You are my little brother in faith, in our work, and forever my friend. Thank you.
Further remarks, the good member from the 49th District, Representative Stonier.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Richard, a lot of nice things said about you. I'm here to round out the stories. I would stand in support of this resolution if you'd been kind to me, but you haven't been. If you were a welcoming presence when I first arrived in this place, but you were not. You taught me a lot about politics, walking out of a 7th grade classroom in December and into this place as a freshman legislator in the 17th Legislative District, with my seatmates being Representative Harris and Senator Don Benton. And you as minority leader, I learned a lot. For that, I would thank you, because I am better, stronger, and smarter because of the tough lessons you taught me. That's probably true for a lot of us here, as you've heard. We come from a region of the state that's quite unique. Southwest Washington is different in that there's a river border community to another state with another system of taxation and business. Quite a mix of rural and urban communities. Not very many places like our region can you drive through calm, beautiful country roads and then find yourself in a town somewhere. The economy, when it tanks, hits our region harder than it does other places. It takes a whole lot longer to recover. And your district is still seeing the results of that. When I returned here the second time, you said, you're going to like me a whole lot better now. I said I didn't believe you. But as it turns out, it's true. I like you a whole lot more because while our politics in our region of the state can be ugly and divisive, the people that you and I serve count on us to find common ground for the sake of their families, their jobs, and their futures. So in the last year or so of our co-service here, I stand to thank you for your service. to this institution. You care so deeply about making sure this place works. You and I both love the game of politics as it plays out on the chessboard. I learned years ago that when you take your red book out, you're probably up to no good, or you just want to see who sweats it over here. But the fact that we are all here to represent our communities and to serve them, and that we should put those people we serve above all the politics at times, is what I've come back to do. And I thank you for teaching me that lesson. I congratulate you on your redemption. And your newfound ways to enjoy life, as I know you will with Amy. And I commit to you that I will make good on the promise I made to you in your office a couple weeks ago. That we have a community that needs us to come together and find common ground, to deliver policy, budgets, and good work. And whether you're in office or not, whether I'm here or not, we know there's a lot of work we can do inside and outside these walls. I appreciate the love and compassion you've shown your caucus, the friendship and the teachings that you've offered mine, and I look forward to whatever work we can do for Southwest Washington in the future. Congratulations.
Further remarks, the good member from the 17th District, Representative Harris.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, can I read some Richard DeBolt quotes to you?
I'm not sure whether or not to say please proceed, but I will.
Oh, they're not that bad. Madam Speaker, squirrel. Love the dog, hate the dog. Always be willing to kill the hostage. Always. Want nothing. So when you would go into Richard's office and you'd say, geez, my bill, he'd go, Harris, want nothing. Wow, really? And then the other one that I liked, and today will be a glorious day to die. That is the man, actually, that got me in, he was mentor to others, but Richard is actually the person that got me to run for office. I ran in 2006, lost. Ran in 2008, lost. And Richard was always there. I'd call him up and he'd say, Paul, I think you'll do better next time. And and so I did. I finally got elected. And then we started to golf together from time to time. And just like politics, if you've ever golfed with Richard DeBolt, nothing's halfway. So when the ball goes straight, it goes a mile. But when it doesn't go straight, it goes a mile the other way. He is a great guy to be your friend. He is loyal. I'll never forget, in our caucus room, we have the shield, and we really haven't talked about the shield, but I'll never forget my freshman year. I'm another one that came in with a good speaker. Many of us came in together. But Richard talked about the shield and the importance of the shield and how if we all unite and stand behind the shield, it will protect us, that we're far stronger together than we are being separate and alone. And I will never forget that. I want to thank Richard. You will be missed. You're a great statesman. If you ever want Richard to speak on an issue, he can do it instantaneously. He can speak on either side. He truly can. He can explain either side to you in 30 seconds, and he takes no prep. He's awesome. You will be missed, my man. Thank you.
Further remarks. The good member from the 43rd District, Representative Chop.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Richard, you and I are brothers. We've been through a whole lot together. An earthquake, living in the People's Portable in the parking lot. And by the way, that is not the definition of, what do you call it, social distancing. It was just the opposite. We were packed in like sardines. Yeah. The Great Recession, a budget crisis or two, actually. and also a fun dinner or two at the Ram in Lacey there. That was so much fun. Through all that and more, we have worked together, we've struggled together, we hassled each other, and dealt with family feuds in this place, just like real brothers. Richard, you have done a lot of good for the people of the state of Washington in your many roles in leadership and on committees. You and I both really enjoyed creating a little trouble for the Healthcare Committee chair, which she immediately squashed. So I feel your pain, brother. In your capital budget role, just such great work working with the chair on our side. You've touched so many communities and so many lives, and I really encourage the two of you to go around the state, look at what you've done. Look at the school buildings, the college facilities, the training centers, the child care centers, the housing projects, one after another. I know you even advocated for projects in my district. And so you ought to be proud of what you've done for the people of the state. Richard, also, one of your greatest gifts is your ability to deal with people as people. In this imposing building, you always work with people as people. Not full of yourself, not pretentious, not grandiose. You treated everyone as a friend or a colleague. Down to earth, among the people, with you in this place. This truly is the people's house. I don't know if many of you know that Richard has a college degree in international relations. I mean, I just found that out today. I'm very impressed, Richard. But maybe that's why you did such a great job building relationships in this place. Also, Richard, you have many talents. Your ability to speak your mind, to give a great speech on the House floor. You're a great voice for your caucus. You have the gift of gab with anyone, and I truly admire that, including your frequent use of zingers at the end of your speeches. Knowing that you probably would be gavelled down, you often saved your most pungent points to the end of your speeches. Richard, you and I have an aversion to the usual House rules. The other day, maybe that was yesterday, it seems like a while ago, you were gavelled down by the Speaker for not wearing a tie on the floor. And right after that moment, you came back here and asked me to do the same as part of my speech today, right now. So at your request and in solidarity with my brother Richard, I renounce neckties and dispense with oppressive formality. Madam Speaker, forgive me.
I've clearly lost all control. Thank goodness for the final speech, I am going to recognize the good member from the 7th District, Representative Kretz.
That's a hard one to follow. Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, as we've been sitting here listening to this for the last, well, like 2 hours now, something like, I think this is a really good example of how Richard usually operates. You know, he came to me and he said, God, you know, we go way back and I'd really like you to speak, and there's only can be 3 on our side. And he went and said the same thing to 35 people. That's how he works. Here we are. But those are 2 of my favorite people up there. People that have always been there for me. Amy has always been welcoming, been to their house. She's been to the ranch. I can tell you she looks a hell of a lot better on a horse than Richard does. I remember when I first got here, you know, we had the election and then there was reorg right after. And you don't know any of these people that are trying to convince you to support them. And I really didn't like what Richard had to say. That's a common theme. None of us really liked him at first. But I remember my seatmate at the time, Bob Sump, talking about Richard and his qualifications. And he said he's smart, his mind is lightning fast, and he will, you probably noticed this, finish your sentence for you quite often when you're talking to him because he knows what you're thinking. I think his main point, though, in Richard's support was that there's no one in this place that can drive Frank Chop crazier than Richard. So that was the main selling point. He did say, though, you probably wouldn't pick him to be your next door neighbor. But I've never seen anybody that was in tune with this place like Richard is. You know, I've seen him sitting up here. Things are going on. He's usually doing 2 or 3 things at once, Game Boy, whatever, talking to somebody on the phone. And something changes on the floor. He knows it before anybody else does. And I've just been amazed over the years at that sense of awareness of what's going on in this place. He's tuned into it like nobody I've ever seen. And it's a great talent, especially out here on the floor for a floor leader. I can think of some horrible moments. I remember the time in caucus where he confused Cesar Chavez with Che Guevara, and that was quite a speech. You know, I was trying to get some time this morning to work on this, and there's a lot of things that I was trying to get jotted down here in the last 10 minutes because I didn't have time this morning. And then I kept thinking, you know, most of the stuff I know about Richard should never go on a piece of paper. It was interesting watching him in the early parts. I got to go back to Bob Sump for a second. So my freshman class got here after talked to Bob Sump, and the first thing my freshman class did was take him out, you know, which was kind of a crowning glory. But the political ability is like nobody I've ever seen here. And when Richard was into the political end of it, never saw anybody better. There was a lot of good ideas. There were some really bad ones. But it was all done in a really fast, brilliant way. Sometimes it was brilliantly creative and sometimes brilliantly idiotic. I'm thinking postcards from the edge, things like that. A lot of history there. But I've never seen anybody make such a big change when he went from the political side, focused on that, to policy. And I remember my early years here, that was the last thing Richard ever wanted to talk about was policy. He was always looking at the political. I think a lot of it was because we had 33 seats, you know, so you're looking at the other end of it. But watching him go into policy has been a real education for me, watching him immerse himself in it. We heard several other members talk about the experience of working with you, how you applied yourself to something that I knew was not your first instincts. You know, we were sitting, several people have mentioned the shoot the hostage thing, and Richard and I were in the back office here a few days ago with some of the leadership, and we both shot our hostages, and everybody went out, and Rich and I were sitting there looking at each other, and kind of going, did we do the right thing, you know? And I had to say, Richard, if you look around at the floor in that back office, there is years worth of blood back there from hostages being shot in that office, and he was always willing to do it. If it was his, it was gone. It had no value, and it was gone if it was best for the caucus or another member, if the hostage had to go, and it was one of the main lessons I learned. I guess I'll just say there's nobody I've enjoyed more here. Nobody that I could trust more. And you have always had my back, and I'll never forget it.
Before we move to final passage, Representative DeBolt wants me to know that, or to let the viewing audience know that hostages are bills for the purposes of this discussion. The question before the House is adoption of Resolution 4686. As many are as in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. Before I give these to Representative DeBolt, a couple moments of speaker's privilege. I just want to say, I think, two things. That the speeches are so true about you, Richard, but I want to also talk about the lesson, one of the lessons that you taught me. You taught me many, but they were hard lessons at times. So I was always on healthcare, and when you came onto healthcare, I was pretty, I was a new member, and Richard was there, and I learned a lot about making sure to ask enough questions. So my first experience when we worked together, I can't remember the actual bill, but I had talked to Richard and he had agreed to support an amendment of mine. And I remember telling the chair, we're good to go. He's going to support the amendment and we'll have bipartisan support and it'll be great. I just didn't ask him if he was going to do anything else, like put a striker on my bill that would have, that meant when it got adopted my amendment was out of order and the whole bill had to die. But he said he still would support my amendment even though he killed the bill. But right, and so many people have talked about this kind of lessons by experience. You were great at that. But Richard, actually one of the most personally and professionally fulfilling experiences of my life I had with you. And when you came in to tell me that you were going to be retiring, we talked about this. When I arrived here, one of the things I wanted to do so much was end reparative therapy for LGBTQ kids. And we talked about that some, and we weren't successful the first time I tried to work on moving the bill forward. But you came to me after that and you said, Lori, I heard the stories that you told me. That's wrong. That shouldn't happen. And then we started working together on that. And I showed you the only note that's ever come to me on the floor that I've ever saved. Apparently now I have to save them all, but that's a different story. But it's the only note that I ever saved, and I took it, I have it taped in my office, and I took it down and showed it to you. And on it is the day that 94 members of this House voted to end reparative therapy on LGBTQ youth. And that's because you did that with me, and we trusted one another, and we worked with one another. And the note was from an advocate who, the only thing the note said was holy something else. And I just want to thank you for having an open heart to do that. And this, I guess the stories I'm telling are just reflections of what everyone else has said about you. You will be so missed in this place, but your lessons will carry on in members on both sides of the aisle for a very long time.